Hi guys, today I kind of want to go off the script a little bit, and this is not going to be like my normal videos when I have a certain concept and I read a bunch about it and elaborate on it. This is something that's going to be more of a stream of consciousness video, and I don't mean to be like super pretentious or whatever, but I've been thinking a lot about loneliness specifically. And I think that there's a bit of a loneliness epidemic going on in this country. And you know, you ask yourself the question, well, why? Why are so many people feeling alone and like they don't have any real sense of belonging or connection in the current world today? And you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can tackle this issue. But I think that any real conversation that has to do with loneliness has to take into consideration the way past humans and past civilizations dealt with loneliness. I don't think that it was as much as a problem. Not necessarily maybe 100 years, 200 years, 300 years ago even. But even if you especially look at the evolution of human beings, and you're looking at millions upon millions of years ago as well, humans thrived because we are such a social species, because we cooperated with one another. And first off, I should just make it very clear, because first of all, I am an introvert, but I think there's a difference between somebody being introvert and then somebody being social. Like, I think that you can be an introvert and still be very social at the same time. You don't have to necessarily constantly communicate and have these different, you know, hey guys, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Be like this super charismatic individual in order to be social. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's how do you add to the culture of the world? How do you add to the culture of wherever you're living? The main thing, I think, is presence, okay? When we're talking about sociality. Right now, there is an inability for people to live in environments where they're constantly interacting with each other, okay? And by interaction, I'm not speaking about superficial things like, okay, I might text my friend and say, hey, what's up? Or even on the phone. That's not the same thing. I think we all can consider the fact that talking or texting is, talking on the phone or whatever, is nowhere near the same as meeting somebody in person and seeing their gestures and their facial features and their animation. It's just a completely different sensation. Our brains are literally primed to have a little bit of a dopamine spike, especially when we see different human faces. But I think the problem that I'm trying to say here is that we've been stripped of a lot of that. Because when you look at the way, again, we evolved for so many years, very tight-knit communities, very small groups, about 100. Everybody knew each other. Everybody. And if you didn't cooperate with the group, if you didn't try to at least acknowledge another person's existence on a social level, well, then you were probably going to be seen as somebody who's a bit of a threat or somebody who's not participating, and you would get called out for that. Nowadays, we don't have this constant interaction. And in particular, one thing I want to talk about is, even looking at my own childhood, I just remember that even though there was a time and place to, where I could kind of express myself to people around me and my friends, like even when I was like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years old, it wasn't constant enough. I think that's one of the big differentiating factors when you compare today's way of living and the way of living even millions of years ago, right? Millions of years ago, there was a very active pursuit of culture, a very active way of hanging out with your neighbor, per se, right? Hanging out with whoever is in closest proximity to you. I think a good example of this is that They had a lot of cave rituals, which was in different time periods seen as sort of an initiation rite. And you've probably heard, I think it's like Lascaux or something like that, the Lascaux caves. I don't know. I just know that it's in France. And you have these very beautiful paintings that were engraved in these caves. And some people look at the art and they're just like, well, why did they do that? It was really an initiation process. They would take a lot of these young men who were like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and bring them into the cave. And they'd have this extremely spiritual experience where for them, they would represent their artwork as symbolizing the forces of nature that they would have to face in the real world. And it became this really spiritual and totally illogical way. I guess you could say it was logical in its illogicality, or rational in its irrationality. Because on first glance, when you look at something like that, just like dancing or whatever in the cave, just all these crazy initiation rites, at first it seems like it serves no purpose, but the reality is that it's actually something that has been selected for, and a behavior and a characteristic that has helped us thrive as human beings on this planet. Nowadays, we don't really have these initiation rites. Everything is very organized. I feel like it's not as free-flowing. I feel like human beings are kind of almost disturbed fundamentally. Hello? What's up? Sorry, my friend called me. Wanted to eat some barbecue. It's like, yo, I'm not trying to gain weight out here, but whatever. It's barbecue. You can't deny something like that. You can't turn down that offer. But I digress. Why did I say that? That's like such a whatever. Basically, going back on to what I was talking about, I think that the modern generation is very isolated. We don't have enough hotspots. We don't have enough outlets where we can express the primitive side of our human nature. And again, when we talk about rituals, even if you look at something like organized religion, it's too organized. It's not, there's not enough freedom. There's not enough ability to spiritually express yourself. Of course, religion is something that does constantly evolve, and I do think that there's a lot of good components to it, but it needs to do a little bit more. Especially when you look at millions of years ago, et cetera, this kind of spirituality that the oneness with nature that developed was more organic, a little bit more free-flowing. And humans are very, very creative species. I think we need that kind of autonomy and freedom to communicate on an optimal level. But again, when you look at loneliness, everybody is, it's nearly like a unanimous thing. Everybody, I feel like, the vast majority of people are very lonely, and of course many of them will not admit it. I can guarantee you, most people, when they look at me, they're just like, you don't really look like a lonely person. And of course, I'm human, and I have moments where I feel lonely sometimes. I feel moments when I want to find some sort of outlet, some sort of way to manifest the feelings that I have inside and all this creative energy, and I just want to throw it out there into the world, but I feel limited because we live nowadays in a very rational oriented world that I think, here's the thing, I think it's a bit of a movement, even like Descartes, the classic philosopher. He was kind of the guy who had the whole, I think, therefore I am. But he adopted this extreme approach of rationality. And this was probably especially during the Renaissance period, where all of a sudden there was kind of this reaction against religion, because there wasn't like, people thought, let's kill the baby with the bathwater. They didn't say, okay, there is something about religion. There is some sort of element of spirituality that is important and that creatively helps the human species prosper. They didn't think like that. They were just like, nope, rationality, rationality, rationality. You got to be reading Einstein books, Leibniz in your spare time, philosophy books 24/7. And, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what happens is that it becomes a problem when that sort of mentality begins to monopolize our existence. When it monopolizes the way we think, and people say, no, you have to live in a rational way. And certainly humans are arguably the most rational species on this planet. However, a lot of what we do is very, very primitive, very emotional. And you also have to cater to both the rational faculty and the irrational faculties, right? There's a reason why I think now, for example, you look at the Avengers. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the Avengers. It's all right, but I think there's a reason why so many people relate to it and so many people love it. Because it speaks to that very primitive side of human nature. There's a togetherness about that story. This is another thing with storytelling specifically, is that it's often a collective effort. If you look at a lot of the mythologies that have been created throughout history, they were collective efforts. It wasn't just one person. Like, of course, they say like Homer, but the reality is that Homer was building off of a lineage of different stories and storytellers, and he was influenced again by all these external factors. And even you look at a lot of these individuals who write folklore and stuff like that way back when. Oftentimes you would have kind of like a storyteller, like a main storyteller for like a certain country or like village or whatever, and then they'd visit like another storyteller from another village, and they'd like give each other feedback. It's a collective process. It's a collective process. Anyway, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But you know, one thing I was just thinking about that's really interesting is I think social media, especially, is quite a problem, and not just that, but technology. There's a lot of good things about technology, but let's not be blindsided by the fact that, well, there's a lot of cons to it too. I was visiting my niece, who's like 6 years old, you know, last week, and I just remember, you know, as soon as I walk in there, she's got an iPad in her hand, you know. It's so easy as a parent to just say, hey, you know, you're kind of annoying me, kid. I'm just going to give you, like, you know, Candy Crush game on the iPad, wherever you can play whatever you want. Just leave me alone. It's very easy to do that, but that's probably not the best for her psychological development. She, I really think, is very lonely. And I hate to say that. I don't like to say that about my own niece, but I think that she's very lonely. And I just remember I walked in, I brought in a deck of cards, and I just played a little game with her, and then my nephew as well. And you should have seen the smile on her face. She looked like she was overflowing with just joy. It was a great moment. But it's just something as simple as that, as just a game of cards. It meant so much to her because it's different. Like, of course, you know, when we don't have people who we can socially interact with, we go to the alternative, which is just looking on the iPad, looking at that, but that's not a real connection. I'm just some dude, right? I'm just the uncle. I walk in and that's enough, right? That's enough. Just that one-on-one communication. And I also think I told her a bunch of like different mythological stories that I totally just made up in my head. Like, I think I told her like my brother, he has like this house, I think in like Edina or whatever, and he's got like a chicken coop in the basement. And I basically told her like this crazy story about how like there's like this underground tunnel beneath the chicken coop that leads to like a golden egg and like this crazy cult or whatever. It was just really funny. But she was just captivated by that, captivated by the story. Even though it's crazy, it's made up, she loved it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is this: we need more of that in a collective sort of way. I want to see, from a young age, large groups of people, up to like 100, I suppose, really always having that open access to each other. And really always having that open access to the point where it's like, okay, if I want to express myself in this way, I can go to that person. I want to express myself in that way, I can go to but also there's again, there's the idea of the group, which is very important. Of course, individuality is something that is a privilege, but at the same time, you also have to understand that I think individuality itself is fostered by the collective. You need to understand how to behave as a human being, and you need a certain awareness to behave in a way that qualifies you to become an individual. And yeah, that's, those are my thoughts. Those are my 2 cents. And tell me if you guys enjoy videos like this, when I pretty much just go off the script and just say whatever comes into my mind. I guess I could call it like a tiger bite. This is clever. This is quite clever. This is tiger bite or tiger talk. I don't know. Just kind of these 1v1 chats where I'm just casual, I guess. But let me know your thoughts on the current state of loneliness, not just in this country, but in the world as a whole. And yeah, that's really it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys take care.